You know what they say, looks can kill. And in the basement of Chernobyl, something called the elephant's foot is waiting to prove it. We are talking about a terrifying mass of nuclear lava so radioactive that just a few minutes near it would have been a certain death sentence. These are the nuclear stories you won't find in a textbook. The elephant's foot. Imagine a freakishly awesome science project gone terribly wrong. Someone mixed molten nuclear fuel, concrete, steel, and sand and left it simmering in a basement. The result was something called the elephant's foot, a scorched jet black glob that's been dubbed the world's most radioactive object. And do you know where this elephant foot is? Can you guess? That's right. It lives in the basement of Chernobyl. It is one of the few things on this planet that can kill you with just one look. What is the elephant's foot? In December 1986, 8 months after the Chernobyl reactor meltdown, workers descended into the basement of Reactor 4. What they found there was something nobody had expected, and it turned out to be something they would hate until their premature deaths. Sitting there on the floor was a gob of fused molten mass, hardened into a grotesque blob that looked like elephant skin. It was so radioactive, they needed remote cameras on wheels to photograph it. One touch was certain death. That black goo was not just nuclear fuel, it was corium. This is a material created through the disastrously melted nuclear core combining with structural steel and concrete. The mass had melted through several feet of floor before oozing to its current resting spot in a maintenance corridor. It solidified into a rock-like mass that cracked and cooled over time, but even today remains terrifyingly radioactive. Why is it so radioactive? Because corium is basically nuclear lava. Corium is the molten magma produced by a nuclear meltdown, a killer cocktail of uranium oxide, zirconium fuel cladding, steel, silica-rich concrete, sand, and plumbing parts. It flows like lava, hardens like glass, and is deadlier than both. How deadly? Just standing near the elephant's foot in 1986 would have killed you in under 5 minutes. You didn't even need to touch it, just be close to it. The radiation levels were 8,000 to 10,000 roentgens per hour, which is, well, way too much. By 1996, radiation levels in the elephant's foot's corridor did fall to only about 800 roentgens per hour. 800 is surely a lot less than 8,000, right? But the elephant's foot was still too deadly to get near. The thing about corium is that it holds long-lasting deadly isotopes like cesium-137, strontium-90, plutonium, and others for centuries. Breaking up the corium isn't a good idea because to remove it would blow radioactive dust everywhere. And that is even worse. The bottom line is that the elephant's foot is alive. It is a self-heating, irradiating rock that can kill anyone who messes with it. Containment efforts and the ongoing menace. In 2016, the massive new safe confinement dome was installed over Reactor 4 to trap the elephant's foot and stabilize the site. But critical neutron sensors in room 305/2, located below the core, have recorded rising emissions. Radiation levels are increasing. This is likely from drying corium, and it could destabilize structures or release radioactive dust. Engineer Edwin Lyman warns that corium is more dangerous than spent fuel and more unstable and unpredictable. Nobody knows exactly how this radioactive lava will evolve, though it's definitely not becoming less radioactive anytime soon. Even with the massive dome over Chernobyl, the elephant's foot remains a death trap and a warning for the future. Right now, scientists are trying to figure out how to prevent another elephant's foot from forming. In controlled lab setups, researchers at Argonne National Laboratory simulate corium scenarios using electricity to mimic decay. Thanks to this research, scientists know which cooling strategies might work if there's ever another nuclear meltdown. They are currently testing how much water to inject, where, and how fast. These are emergency protocols designed to avoid another elephant's foot disaster. This lava-like mass in Chernobyl's basement is less a monument to engineering and more a tombstone to human hubris. It glows ominously, refuses to cool, and stands as both warning and legacy of nuclear catastrophe. Would you spend 60 seconds with the elephant's foot for $1 million? Let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe. When you drop a nuke in a swamp. Once upon a time in the Soviet Union, circa the 1970s, somebody with a thick Russian accent got the brilliant idea to start nuking swamps. Not to kill all the frogs, no way. The Soviets wanted to do something spectacular. They wanted to defy nature by reversing the direction of their rivers. It makes about as much sense as you think, and it worked about as well as you'd imagine. When Soviet engineers realized that shovels wouldn't cut it, they did what any ambitious superpower might do. They reached for the nukes. Their plan was to detonate hundreds of atomic bombs underground to dig canals, redirect rivers, save the dying Aral Sea, water the deserts of Central Asia, and show the Americans how to do peaceful nuking right. The results were about as terrible as results can get. The Soviets botched the whole operation, ending up with a radioactive lake in the middle of nowhere. How they created their lake of doom is a story worthy of whoever directed Tiger King. Birth of a radioactive bathtub. On February 23, 1971, somewhere west of the Ural Mountains, deep in the Russian taiga, Soviet engineers armed with clipboards were about to detonate 3 nuclear devices buried over 300 feet underground. Each one was equipped with the explosive power of the Hiroshima bomb. The project was codenamed Taiga, not like the rapper, but the snowy forest in Siberia. It was a proof of concept, meaning the Soviets needed the project to work to prove that nukes could be used for landscaping. They wanted to use nukes to excavate a giant canal linking the Petroa River to the Kama River, which feeds the Volga River. And that way, they could divert a massive amount of water southward, away from its usual Arctic Ocean destination, and instead into thirsty Central Asia and the southern Soviet republics. On paper, the plan was smart enough. The goal was even clever, plotting to bring water to water-starved regions. But using a nuke to carve a canal is, let's just say, an interesting choice. The bombs went off. The ground shook. A geyser of earth and water blasted skyward. It was, as scientist Leonid Volkov later put it, an impressive sight. But it didn't create a usable canal, not by a long shot. Instead, it gave us Nuclear Lake, a strangely serene, lightly irradiated body of water now surrounded by bogs, rusting radiation warning signs, and earthen mounds that look like Cold War mass graves. Blogger Andrei Fadiv made the pilgrimage to Nuclear Lake in 2024 and reported that the water was transparent and the vibe was pretty chill. At least it was chill until his radiation meter started clicking like a Geiger-powered maraca. How to make a river flow the wrong way. The main thing the Soviets wanted to do was reverse the rivers of Siberia, forcing them to flow backwards. Crazy, right? Like trying to force the Earth to spin the other way. The Soviets were desperate to bring water to the deserts of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. The Soviets imagined a landscape of fertile fields, booming agriculture, and lots of happy peasant farmers basking in the iron sun of communism. I should mention here that the Soviets didn't think they were doing something foolish or impossible. Nearly 200 institutes and over 68,000 people were enlisted in the project, many of them top global scientists. This was a huge think tank that really thought they could force rivers to go backwards, like they could undo the work of God himself. A Communist Party resolution in 1975 promised water delivery to Central Asia by 1985, 10 years later, and project completion by 2000. This scale was titanic. The canal would be roughly 1,000 miles long, would require hundreds of nuclear detonations, and the redirection of 10% of the Ob and Irtysh rivers. The Soviets would call these nuclear detonations peaceful nuclear explosions, or PNEs for short. Roman aqueduct envy. The Soviets weren't delusional. They admired ancient Roman aqueducts and idolized grand American engineering projects like the Tennessee Valley Authority. They knew their plan was immense, but they thought they could pull it off. And then came the early warning signs that the USSR was going to collapse. In the early 1980s, scientists began dissenting in massive numbers, not just against this project, but against the Soviet Union as an entity. Hydrologist Sergei Zalygin, who once had supported the idea of bombing swamps into canals, became its fiercest critic. He called river reversal a colonial project, an imperial fantasy dressed in scientific drag. In his 1986 book, Turnabout, he blasted the whole idea as a boondoggle built on bad math and ego. Boondoggle. That's a great word, isn't it? Professor Paul Josephson, a U.S. historian who gained access to internal documents, read the project's environmental impact report and said he was floored. By reversing the rivers, the Soviets would effectively destroy massive portions of the environment in Siberia. Diverting the rivers could have destroyed entire ecosystems, shifted regional climates, spread non-native species across vast distances, and even changed the formation of Arctic sea ice. Chernobyl changed everything. Scientists were dissenting, the public was raging, and the Soviet Union was on its last flimsy legs. And then, in 1986, Chernobyl happened. The reactor explosion blew a hole in Soviet techno-optimism. Suddenly, atomic solutions to ecological problems didn't sound so clever. Public fear soared, government funds drained into the disaster response, and 4 months later, Mikhail Gorbachev quietly canceled the river reversal project. The nukes stopped, the canals were never dug, and the mighty Ob and Irtysh rivers kept flowing into the Arctic unbothered. The zombie plan. You'd think that would be the end of it. Mostly everyone agreed it was a horrible plan. It's the kind of thing Dr. Evil wouldn't do unless he was paid 87 bazillion quadrillion dollars. But the idea just won't die. In 2008, Moscow's former mayor Yuri Luskov published Water and Peace, a book arguing that reversing Siberian rivers wasn't so crazy after all. And in 2025, 2 Russian scientists published an op-ed claiming modern technology makes it viable, and that it would align with Russia's geopolitical pivot to the east. In other words, the Russians are now thinking less about sending water to grow crops in Uzbekistan and are more interested in selling water to China instead. While nothing is in the works yet, there could come a day where Russia starts bombing its swamps. In the meantime, let's all enjoy the subtle glow of Nuclear Lake. Today it's quiet, almost peaceful. The boreal forest has crept back, blanketing the scars of atomic destruction. In 2024, a new scientific expedition reported normal radiation levels. I guess that means it's safe now to swim in Nuclear Lake. But are you putting on your swimsuit to go diving with three-eyed fish? Just asking. The Demon Core. There are cautionary tales, and then there's the story of the Demon Core. It's a weapon that never saw the battlefield but still managed to kill 2 scientists, irradiate several others, and scare the lab coats off an entire generation of nuclear physicists. It was supposed to be part of the 3rd atomic bomb, a final chapter in the US playbook for World War II. But the war ended, and the plutonium core, 14 pounds of pure chain-reactive nightmare, stuck around at Los Alamos National Laboratory, getting repurposed not as a weapon, but as a science experiment. A science experiment with the temperament of a tiger and the charm of a black hole. What followed were 2 fatal accidents, a new approach to nuclear safety, and one unforgettable nickname. This is the story of the Demon Core, the ball of death that taught physicists just how thin the line is between Eureka and uh-oh. Act 1. The Core. To understand how all this began, I have to go back to the Manhattan Project, the atomic arms race that built the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. You might know that those bombs were called Little Boy and Fat Man. But what few people know is that America had a 3rd bomb in the lineup that wasn't named yet. This 3rd bomb was scheduled to be dropped if Japan didn't surrender after the first 2 blasts. Spoiler, they surrendered pretty much instantly, as one does when someone starts dropping atomic bombs on them. So instead of detonating over a city, the so-called Demon Core ended up chilling in a lab like a nuclear time bomb with no deadline. But just because it was in a lab didn't mean it was harmless. Plutonium-239, the core's main ingredient, doesn't know how to retire quietly. It remained perfectly capable of going critical. And we all know what happens when something nuclear goes critical. Looking at you, Chernobyl. With the war over and peace officially a thing again, kinda, sorta, scientists decided, let's poke the Demon Core and see what happens. Because there's a sentence that always turns out well. Act 2. The brick that broke the world. Harry Daghlian, a 24-year-old physicist who definitely didn't get paid enough for what he was doing, was working late on August 21st, 1945, conducting a criticality experiment. That is nuclear speak for let's take this very unstable material and build a Lego tower of death around it to see how close we can get to a chain reaction. His setup involved carefully stacking tungsten carbide bricks around the demon core to reflect neutrons back into it. Doing this would bring it dangerously close to going prompt critical, which would pretty much erase everything in the general area of the core. When Harry realized the neutron levels were climbing too high and he needed to end the experiment, he reached in to remove the last tungsten carbide brick, only to drop it directly on the core. It was bad, really bad. There was a bright blue flash of released radiation, and Harry Daghlian was hit with a massive dose. His hand was burned, his body began failing, and 25 days later, he died of acute radiation poisoning. Harry was dead, and the demon core was still sitting in the lab, waiting for its next victim. Act 3. Louis Slotin. Almost a full year later, on May 21st, 1946, things got worse. In came Louis Slotin, a Canadian physicist with a flair for danger and the kind of confidence you usually only find on very bad first dates. Slotin was demonstrating a hands-on criticality experiment, the exact same experiment that killed Harry. This time, Slotin was using 2 hemispherical beryllium shells used to reflect neutrons back into the core. The experiment was to lower the shells around the core just enough to see how close it comes to criticality. If you're thinking, surely they had some kind of remote-controlled system to do this safely, think again. Slotin used a flathead screwdriver to wedge the shells apart. This was a nuclear scientist handling weapons-grade plutonium, and he was essentially playing Operation. If he lost the game, everyone in the room died. Unlike Harry, Slotin was performing the experiment in front of an audience. And remember, this isn't even 12 months after Harry's death. How crazy do you have to be? As you could probably have guessed, Slotin's screwdriver slipped. It popped out, the shells clapped shut, the core went critical. Again, there was a bright blue flash as a wave of radiation pulsed through the room. Slotin, like Harry Daghlian before him, reacted instantly, ripping the shells apart to stop the reaction. But the damage was already done. He absorbed a lethal dose of radiation and died 9 days later, becoming the second victim of the demon core. The other scientists in the room survived with various levels of exposure. Slotin's quick action probably saved their lives, but it was the kind of heroism that no one wanted to repeat. I mean, I'm still stuck on the nuclear scientist using a screwdriver and bringing in an audience to watch. And then someone died again. This was supposed to be literal rocket science, and these guys were dropping dead like flies in a bug zapper. Act 4. The core retires. After Slotin's death, Los Alamos decided that enough was enough. No more dead scientists. The demon core was scheduled for use in future tests, but with 2 bodies on its conscience, the lab canceled all future tests. The core was melted down and repurposed into other cores, but never again assembled for live detonation. More importantly, the accidents forced a complete overhaul of nuclear safety protocols. Hands-on experiments were a thing of the past. The new rule was remote-controlled criticality experiments only. The new rule of thumb was that scientists couldn't be within a quarter mile of anything that could go promptly critical. These were lessons written in pain and blood, and let's be honest, some pretty blatant stupidity. But they shaped how nuclear labs operate to this day. And these days, there are very few avoidable accidents. What does critical actually mean? If you've made it this far, you deserve an explanation for some of the buzzwords I've been throwing down, especially critical. A core becomes critical when every fission reaction leads to exactly one more. That's a sustained chain reaction. It's how nuclear reactors work. When you hit supercritical, every reaction leads to more than one, and things accelerate out of control. That's how bombs work. What Daghlian and Slotin triggered were prompt critical reactions. That's when the chain reaction kicks off faster than human reflexes can respond. Once a chain reaction goes critical, it's like trying to stop a bullet with your hand. The legacy of the demon core. It never made it to Japan. It never exploded in a test, but the Demon Core still killed 2 people, irradiated a handful of others, and changed how the world treats nuclear materials forever. It became a symbol of chaos, a warning that even the smartest minds on Earth can underestimate the forces that they've unleashed. The core's legacy lives on today in radiation safety protocols and the remote manipulators now standard at nuclear labs and in every physics textbook that teaches students not to tempt fate with a screwdriver and a ball of plutonium. Who wants to be a nuclear scientist? And now for a quick break, but first I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Ave Joe and Brea Little for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for hanging out every day. Be sure to hit that notification bell and let me know what other topics you'd like to see in the comments. Did US nukes destroy movie stars? This might be the darkest punchline in Hollywood history. What do you get when you cross John Wayne, Genghis Khan, and a nuclear fallout zone? You get The Conqueror, a box office flop so cursed it may have literally killed its own cast and crew. This isn't a metaphor, my friends. Dozens of very real Hollywood funerals may have been hastened thanks to the US government bombing a film set. Hollywood meets Hiroshima. Let's travel back to 1954. Hollywood titan Howard Hughes, aviator and eccentric billionaire, decided the world needed a Genghis Khan biopic. And in a classic 1950s move, Howard cast John Wayne as the Mongol warlord. The Duke himself, the whitest cowboy in the Wild West, was swaggering around an eyeliner and a Fu Manchu mustache, asking you to believe he was born on the steppes of Central Asia. The movie was titled The Conqueror, and for reasons lost to time and sanity, Hughes picked St. George, Utah as the perfect backdrop for his desert epic. Just one teensy issue. St. George was 137 miles downwind from Yucca Flat, Nevada, home to America's favorite Cold War pastime, nuclear bomb testing. Ground zero for bad decisions. From 1951 to 1963, the US military treated the Nevada test site like a fireworks stand for apocalypse enthusiasts. They detonated a total of 928 nuclear devices. About 100 of those were atmospheric tests, meaning the radiation didn't stay buried underground. When you detonate a nuke in the atmosphere, the radiation goes airborne. The rads blew away on the wind, drifted in the breeze, and settled wherever they fancied. A lot of the atomic debris from those detonations landed in St. George, Utah. In 1953 alone, a year before The Conqueror began filming, 11 bombs went off under Operation Upshot Knothole. I know, it's in the top 5 worst secret operation names ever. Upshot Knothole, really? Anyway, 2 bombs in particular, one launched on April 25th and the other on May 19th, were especially brutal. They clocked in at 43 and 32.4 kilotons. For context, Hiroshima's bomb was just 13 kilotons. These were weaponized nightmares. More than double the yield of the Hiroshima bomb meant significant levels of radiation being scattered across the American continent. After the May 19 bomb, which was nicknamed Harry, the town of St. George was blanketed with invisible fallout. Geiger counters lit up like Christmas decorations. In some spots, the radiation maxed out the instruments. And then, less than a year later, Howard Hughes shipped his cast and crew, including John Wayne, Susan Hayward, Pedro Armendariz, Agnes Moorehead, Lee Van Cleef, and John Hoyt, right into the fallout zone. The very same place where the Geiger counters had previously been off the charts. What's the worst that could happen? Dirt, death, and 60 tons of regret. Filming went ahead in 1954. Almost immediately, crew members started getting sick, but they powered through, having no idea they were being irradiated. Gotta make that Mongol biopic at all costs. Now, if you thought this story couldn't reach higher levels of dangerous stupidity, you haven't been paying attention. When the actors went back to Hollywood to film some things on film sets, Howard Hughes wanted to keep the desert look. To do this, he shipped 60 tons of radioactive dirt from Utah to the Hollywood set so the sand matched on camera. The crew, the actors, and everyone who was on set in Utah had already been exposed to massive radiation, and then Howard Hughes shipped the radiation back to Hollywood. You can't make this stuff up. It's nuts. They brought nuclear-contaminated soil straight into Los Angeles and irradiated the studio lot, the air vents, and the craft services table. It was a disaster that nobody knew was unfolding until it was too late. Don't forget, this was the age of doctors prescribing cigarettes for lung pain. Radiation sickness was not public knowledge. The body count begins. The Conqueror bombed in theaters. Not a pun, it really did bomb. Who would have thought that nobody wanted to see John Wayne cosplaying as Genghis Khan? And then came the bodies. Pedro Armendariz was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 1960. It was terminal. He died in 1963. That same year, director Dick Powell died of lymphatic cancer at age 53. Susan Hayward suffered from breast, uterine, skin, and ultimately brain cancer. She died in 1974 at the age of 56. Agnes Moorehead died of uterine cancer that same year. Lee Van Cleef died of throat cancer in 1989. John Hoyt died of lung cancer in 1991. And the big guy, John Wayne, managed to hold on for dear life until dying in 1979 after battling throat, lung, and stomach cancers for years. By 1980, 91 out of the 220 cast and crew members had developed cancer. 46 had died. Nearly half the production team had been wiped out in slow, horrible, agonizing deaths. Was it because they shot a terrible movie in a place so radioactive even Mr. Manhattan would get a fever? Or is it just a coincidence? The US government would like you to believe in the coincidence angle, but most educated people aren't buying it, especially not Howard Hughes. The $12 million Vanishing Act. By 1980, Howard Hughes had descended into the legendary paranoia phase of his life. He was more eccentric than ever, but also racked with guilt over what happened. He tried to erase the Conqueror from existence, knowing dang well it was his movie that got so many people sick. He spent $12 million, not much today, but a jaw-dropping sum at the time, to buy up every single print of the film, shelving it indefinitely. He wanted it buried. He wanted the Conqueror to be as lost as the real-life tomb of Genghis Khan. And it worked. The movie disappeared for years. Hughes died in 1976, and only then did Universal Pictures dare bring it back from the vault in 1979, just in time for John Wayne's death. Nice timing, guys. Way to go. Fallout beyond the set. The cast and crew weren't the only victims of this debacle. The people of St. George paid a steep price too. Children developed leukemia. Locals got sick and died. The US government quietly offered compensation, hoping a little money would make the radioactive scars go away. But most people refused it, with one resident calling it exactly what it was: blood money. Make no mistake, the US government directly gave these people radiation poisoning. They are directly at fault for countless cases of leukemia and other horrible things. And do you think they've ever even apologized? As for the 60 tons of radioactive dirt brought to Hollywood, it is now scattered across an industrial area in California. Officials say it no longer poses a danger, but that's exactly what they said in the 50s, right before everyone started dying. The final scene. So, what did America get for its trouble? A historically inaccurate, painfully miscast Genghis Khan movie starring a cowboy and a rubber mustache. Even if it hadn't doomed half the people involved, it still wouldn't have won any Oscars, I don't think. But as a cautionary tale, as a horrifying lesson in hubris, negligence, and maybe don't film a movie in a nuclear fallout zone, The Conqueror might be one of the most important productions in Hollywood history. If you've ever doubted that bad decisions could have nuclear consequences, just remember that John Wayne may have been killed by nuclear fallout. If it didn't kill him, it certainly didn't help. I don't know, have you ever seen The Conqueror? Let me know your favorite scene in the comments, and what did you think of the movie? The Great Hide and Seek, America's Missing Nuclear Bombs. How many bombs do you think the United States of America has accidentally misplaced over the years? I'll give you a clue. It's more than 2, but less than 10. Some might say that even losing one nuclear bomb is too many. Chapter 1. The Spanish Incident. On January 17, 1966, a peaceful winter morning near Palomares, Spain, was shattered. A package fell from the sky like a UFO that ran out of gas. It hit the surface of the Mediterranean and sank like a stone. A shrimp fisherman saw the whole thing go down and was dumbstruck. He thought the object that tumbled out of the sky looked like a bomb. Seconds later, explosions sent shockwaves through the sky. Something was blowing up far above the fisherman's head. Coastal towns shook. Shrapnel rained down on defenseless communities. Fireballs engulfed seagulls and cooked the air. As the fishermen gawked in disbelief, body parts started falling on the mainland like it was raining corpses. A few weeks after this terrifying incident, bomb disposal officer Philip Myers got a late-night teleprinter call. He worked at the Naval Air Facility Sigonella in the east of Sicily. All he was told was that a top-secret emergency was unfolding, and he needed to be there ASAP. He knew what it was before he went. For the last few weeks, ever since January 17th, there had been rumors of a terrible accident in Spain. 2 U.S. military planes had supposedly collided, scattering 4 very dangerous B-28 thermonuclear bombs. 3 of these bombs were quickly recovered, but one was nowhere to be seen. Remember that fisherman? He saw the 4th bomb hit the water and sink. Remember those bodies falling from the sky? They were the pilots of the 2 crashed planes, which sent debris and fire raining down on Palomares. The missing bomb was equipped with a detonation potential of 1.45 megatons of TNT. Philip Myers was charged with essentially covering the whole thing up, but it was too late. Everyone already knew there was a nuke on the sea floor. It took a lot of work, but they did manage to recover it. Chapter 2. Broken Arrows. The Palomares incident is just the headline act. Since 1950, there have been at least 32 accidents that the U.S. designates as broken arrow incidents. These are nuclear weapons mishaps. Most got sorted, but not all. I told you earlier to guess how many nukes the U.S. has lost in total. The number is 3, at least that we know of. There's one somewhere in the marshes of Georgia, one in the Philippine Sea, and another somewhere near Greenland. All missing, all still ready to go kaboom at any moment. Chapter 3. The Missing Nukes. In 1958, a U.S. bomber shook over Tybee Island, Georgia, and dropped a Mark 15 thermonuclear bomb into the Sounds, thankfully without its plutonium core. That bomb is still missing, probably buried under about 15 feet of silt. If someone ever decides to dig it up, they will find a bomb that might still go off. That's going to be a very rude surprise for somebody one day. Another bomb, a B-43 thermonuclear warhead, slipped off an aircraft carrier during training in 1965. It plunged into the Philippine Sea and disappeared. It's currently estimated to be sleeping at about 16,000 feet deep. Good luck ever finding it. The last missing bomb is a B-28 F-1 thermonuclear 2-stage device. It was lost near the Thule Air Base in Greenland on May 22, 1968. How do you lose a nuke on a continent covered in ice? Simple. Just start a fire in the cabin to force the crew to eject, leading the plane to crash into the ocean with its nuclear payload. And that is exactly what happened. The deal with this bomb is a bit different because it wasn't lost without a trace. Scientists found the trail it made when it hit the seabed and followed it. They found the nuke with its parachute deployed, sitting at a depth of about 2,800 feet. The military tried to pull it out with a super advanced fishing line, but botched it. They got the bomb moving upwards towards the surface, but its parachute dragged it back down and the tension snapped the line. The bomb fell even deeper, and this time there was no getting it back. These are the 3 nuclear bombs the U.S. is missing. You're probably of no danger to anyone right now, but it's still a little unnerving to know that 3 nukes are just sitting there like unwashed forks at the bottom of the sink, right? Thanks for watching. What's your favorite nuclear story? How about the time that Ford tried to build a nuclear car? That's for next time. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. See you later. Bye!